Okay, in a previous video you may have seen I reproduced the shoulder pads for this late 1970s Dennis Fisher giant robot from the TV series Doctor Who. As I said, I've redone the shoulder pads, which you can see there in all their shoulder paddery resplendence. And what I was planning to do next was replace those missing pincer claws. So to do that, I've created a mould and taken a hand that already exists off another giant robot. It's a pretty rough mould. Whether it'll work or not's a different question. I'm now going to sink some silicone rubber onto this and see where we go from there, see if this is actually possible. Take a mould, and the same way I made the mould for the giant robot shoulders in the previous videos, I use this Polycraft silicone moulding rubber. Basically you measure out what you need from this, and then you basically 10 parts of this one to 1 part of this one, give it a good mix, and then tip it into your mould. The problem you've got with the viscosity of this substance, when you tip it into the mould, it can form a lot of bubbles. So what I'm going to show you how to do here is degas it, basically by popping it into a vacuum chamber that in effect sucks all the air out of the solution. It might not make much sense now, but when I've done it and shown you it, hopefully you'll see a little bit more what I mean. Okay, what I've done now is I've mixed my ratio of silicone rubber. I'm now going to give this a stir, which will give me, using my nice trendy little glue stick, which will give me a nice pink thing. I'll be back. Okay, so that's that mixed up now, and as you can see, it's full of bubbles. If those bubbles stay in there, they can attract to the surface of what you're trying to mould, and it basically gives you some pretty unpleasant moulding lumps and bumps on what you're trying to do. So what I'll do now is show you how to degas it. Okay, what I've done now is I've basically put my pot inside my homemade gassing chamber. I'm now going to switch the pump on and hopefully drag this air out. Here we go. There she goes. So that's basically, I hope, sucked the gas out of there. You can see, I don't know if it's too dark. Just got to be incredibly careful doing this, not to put too much solution in, or it basically overflows and gets everywhere, which is fine when it's dry, but when it's not, it's a bit messy. So that was basically that being degassed. And there we finally have Kettlewell's robot hand in a mould. So let's give you an indication. Look, this is really sticky stuff. So the reason we took the air bubbles out of that is because they would get encased in it really easily. So that basically gets left now for a couple of hours, few hours, until it goes hard. Then I'll basically pull it out and turn it over and put the other side of the casting on, which should be quite straightforward. So and we'll leave it at that. Okay, it's now the next day, and this silicone rubber has been setting overnight. You can see with the sheen of that light how smooth that is, and it's basically really hard. So which I'm really pleased with. So again, when you do that degassing thing and take all that air out, it makes it, I think it must make it, because it sucked all the air out, it dries really hard and cures really solid. I'm going to take the Lego off now and turn it over. Okay, I've now taken a bit of this mould out. So you can see here's the two section of the hand sat in there. This is my mechanism for getting the resin in, and you always need an exhaust port to let the air that's trapped in the mould out. So again, I'm not brilliant at this, but I basically just want these hands. So Yes, where you can see all this clay residue that's stuck in here, that's deliberate, so it meant the mould would come out in two pieces. Now I've got to chisel this, or get rid of this clay to make the mould a little bit more effective. Okay, I've now cleared all the spare loose bits of clay out of this mould, so now when the top gets put on it, it should create a full complete mould rather than those bits that I had blocked off with those clay barriers. Again, I've had to make sure that these bits of wire are in place that are going to create my injection port and my air escape. So I'm going to build it back up into a mould and try and get the top bit done. Okay, what I've done now is built this mould back up. You know, this may not be perfect, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people out there who are a lot better at this than what I am. Who may have views about the way I've put these in this cast, but it'll do for what I want to do. So, and again, it's just for a little bit of fun, nothing serious, and certainly non-commercial. So, what I'm going to do now, what is important when you do this, is to apply a layer of mould release to this surface here, because if you don't and apply silicone, these things can be a nightmare to get apart. When I was learning how to do this, thing that I always used to forget was to put these holes in to form those lugs and to apply mould release, or whatever it's called, that lets you separate the mould. I've gone into quite a bit of care to make sure all that clay's out, which I hope it is. Okay, here you can see this is mixed, and that's what I mean when I've said before about bubbles coming out of this. So again, I'll just pop this in my trusted vacuum chamber, homemade, cheap. Turn the power on, press that lid down till it grabs. There she goes. Okay, what we're going to do now is gently and slowly pour this solution in here. The higher you do it and the thinner you stream, any air bubbles that may exist should come out in that. So in she goes. I generally do it in the corners and allow the stuff to find its own way. As I said, we don't need loads on this because it was already, it didn't need much. Not very exciting, is it? What you would see if you hadn't degassed this by now would have been chunky bubbles coming up to the surface. You will still get some if there's some stuck in the mould, but otherwise that's fine. So I'm just going to stop this camera and get the rest out with a spatula. Okay, here we are the next morning, and this silicone rubber is completely dried, or cured, as the case may be. Again, you can see that reflect in the light. That's really lovely and smooth. There's not an air bubble in sight, so that's what the real value of that degassing is. The next process on this is to take off these Lego bricks, which is very difficult with one hand, but take these off like such to reveal the mould, and then you basically separate that. So that's it. Okay, here is said mould completed. Not confident this has worked. I'll take the bands off and see where we are with it. So these things are a bit sticky generally, and it's really awkward to do with one hand. So you can see you just prise them apart like that, then inside you can see where the mould has taken with the hands. And here we are with these pincers out of the mould. What was really awkward with these was these little lugs on the end. I think my choice of casting method could have been better with them, because getting them out is a bloody nightmare, to be honest. And to be fair, I'm glad I only need it to do 2 hands with, but as you can see, if you fit that together like so, with a pin in between, that, let's see if we can do a zoom, is a fairly good representation of the giant robot's hand. Okay, here we've got the pincers. I've attached them together with this bit of wire here, basically for ease of applying the primer, which I've done. It's fairly awkward, so it'll need another coat. There's always also a few blemishes on there that need to be sanded off, but for now that's what we're looking like. So I'm really pleased with them. So a little bit of a sand, then an application of the paint. I'm hopeful these things will look fairly good when they're finished, but you can never tell. So that's that. And here is the Dennis Fisher giant robot, resplendent with his new shoulder pads and his new claws or pincers. So let's have a little look at those. So there we go. Yeah, quite an imposing and quite a good figure ultimately, and it looks much better now than it did with those pieces missing, so really pleased with that. And that's it. The only thing to look at now is there's some studs missing from here, and on the same bit on the back, so that shoulder pad is a little bit loose. I need to do something to repair them, but otherwise the job with this bad boy is complete.